Hello there, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be discussing the ISS Voyager NCC 74656-A, the Imperial starship of the Great Terran Empire, recently encountered during a crossover event in 2385. This vessel is a Lamar-class starship, or in this case, Lamar-class warship. Its layout is going to be fairly similar to its Prime Universe counterpart, as we don't know a great deal about the Terran version. However, we can surmise certain things as a result of that. We know that the vessel was at least armed with phasers. Its Prime Universe counterpart also had quantum torpedoes. Pretty safe assumption the Terran version would also carry quantum and other forms of torpedoes. Probably carried fighters, as interestingly, so did its Prime Universe counterpart. The crew vessel had 28 decks and a crew in the Prime Universe again of about 800. So again, probably a similar number. However, there were some differences between the two universes, of course. Generally, the interior of the vessel had a darker aesthetic. This is a reflection not of the universe merely being more evil, but actually the Terrans are known to have a slightly more sensitive optic nerve. Basically, they're not as comfortable in bright light as humans in the Prime Universe are, which, you know, the irony of the darker version of the Prime Universe and them not liking bright light is not exactly lost on anybody there. But the interior of the vessel does have this slightly darker aesthetic. Also, the crew wear slightly different uniforms, as is typically Terran. They're often sleeveless, and the ship is crewed with soldiers, not just science officers and other personnel. Many of the crew wear heavy body armor, including helmets, extensively throughout the ship. Also, we note that in the holding cell area of the ship that there is at least one agony booth in operation in this area. Other than that, other similarities the two vessels have: both ships have a cetacean ops, with it being observed by Jenk and Pog that even the whales are evil in the mirror universe, with the whale, which we may presume is also called Gracie in this universe, having a large scar down one of its eyes, indicating that perhaps even the whale has been involved in combat at some point, or perhaps received it as a disciplinary measure for misbehaving at some point. The vessel became stuck in a sort of interspatial fracturing which took place, allowing for movement between universes. It was noted in dialogue by Chakotay, who was the captain of the ship, although it did also have its actual commanding officer being Admiral Janeway, that Terrans had modified their transporters to prevent such crossovers. We're going to explore that a little bit more in a little bit more detail in a moment, but in short, we do know that the mirror universe, it was stated in the 24th century, had made alterations to the transporter systems to block such crossover events from ever happening again after the crossover event with Kirk and co. back in the 23rd century. And it took Chakotay by some surprise to see people once again here from the Prime Universe, which we are going to discuss again in a little more detail. Some thoughts on that in just a moment. As I said, otherwise, the vessel seems to be superficially similar, if not the same, as its Prime Universe counterpart, indicating things like a slipstream drive were probably included. We know that the deflector dish was just as versatile as its Prime Universe. Basically, what happened was, after the people who beamed over, well, not beamed over, walked over in a sense, by mistake, were captured, about to be interrogated, managed to break free. Chakotay impersonated his Terran counterpart, but was quickly discovered by that universe's Janeway, as it was strongly implied that both Janeway and Chakotay were involved in a romantic relationship in this universe, and she was able to see through the fact that it was not her Chakotay pretty rapidly. Barricading themselves in the bridge after reaching it and getting everyone to leave, they began to mess with deflector control in order to try and seal the sort of trans-dimensional temporal rift that had taken place. And several creatures trying to come through and sort of sterilize the temporal trans-dimensional event known as the Loom were by this point falling through. They raised shields, but as Janeway and the others got to the bridge, they realized the ship was now being besieged by these creatures, asking what they were. They explained to the Terrans, you can either let us finish and do what we're doing and get the hell out of here and fix this, or we can all get eaten by the Loom. Janeway quite pragmatically took the decision to not get eaten but allow them to continue. She took the tactical controls and began to use the phasers to defend the ship against the onslaughts of the Loom, while her officers engaged any that boarded the bridge of the ship. They were, of course, successful in using a remodulated deflector to fix the problem, zipping everybody back to their respective universes and getting the hell out of the mirror universe. Bottom line, ISS Voyager seems to be very, very similar in both aesthetic and appearance to its Prime Universe counterpart. Although, again, they do still utilize a lot of Terran Imperial emblems everywhere, darker aesthetic. The hull painting of ISS Voyager is in yellow. It does seem to lack a lot of the additional detailing and paintwork we would often see with Terran variations of Prime Universe starships. But otherwise, the two vessels do seem pretty closely aligned in a lot of their abilities and general hull profile. It's not known if the vessel was more heavily armed. It's reasonable to conclude it probably was. That would be typically in keeping with Terran vessels, as usually the Terran version ship is more heavily armed, but we don't have that as a concrete fact. And it should be noted the USS Voyager A was also a very heavily armed starship, so maybe the Terrans weren't any more heavily armed than that, but maybe just prioritize those systems a little bit more. More isn't always better. Sometimes the quality of the weapons makes all the difference. Now, we'll cycle back to what I was discussing earlier about Chakotay mentioning about the transporter modification. Now, of course, as I said, this was done in the 23rd century to prevent future crossover events. I'm going to hypothesize that this is not the typical Terran universe that we encounter. It should be pointed out that there were other crossover events that Janeway and Chakotay should have probably been aware of by Sisko and others if it was. Now let's assume for the moment that it's not that universe, and I'm going to explain my theory. I did a video recently on that there were multiple actual versions of the Terran Empire encountered. You have the Star Trek Online variation of the Mirror Universe, the Prime one we encounter that Empress Georgiou was from, and the Terran Kirk and all the others we encounter. We also, of course, have the Dark Universe and the Kelvin Universe versions of the Mirror Universes. Now, based on the appearance of Admiral Janeway alone, the fact that she has an ocular implant very similar in appearance to that of 7 of 9 indicates to me this is a younger version of Marshall Janeway. Marshall Janeway was seen in the Star Trek Online Mirror Universe. Now, I don't actually think this is the STO Mirror Universe necessarily. I suspect it's the Dark Universe based on just hints they dropped in the episode where they mentioned it's all a bit darker there. And also that version of Janeway I believe does exist there. There is obviously a dark Terran version of Janeway in the Dark Universe. The Dark Universe is so called because it's a darker version, obviously, of the Prime Universe, but the Terran Empire never fell and continued on into the 24th century. It's entirely plausible this is that Mirror Universe that they've just encountered. And either there's been a crossover event with the Prime Universe or with another version of the Federation that came here, causing them to have a recollection of some contact. Basically, if you've got multiple versions of the Federation in multiple timelines, you've got multiple versions of the Terran Empire. It's just as plausible. And based on that encounter, it looks to me like this is more likely the Dark Universe, the so-called Dark Universe, rather than the typical Mirror Universe that we encounter. It's very similar, it's just the Empire never fell. It's either that, or the Empire did fall, the rebellion was successful, Earth has been liberated and humanity has gone on to rebuild the Terran Empire. Without more information, it's hard to say. However, dialogue from Kovich from the 32nd century, who mentioned there were crossover events up to the 26th century, he said that the Terran Empire in Georgiou's universe had fallen. He made no mention of it being restored, ever. So, what do you guys think? Is this the same as that universe, or is it actually the Dark Universe, or is it yet another incarnation of the Terran Empire we hadn't previously encountered? One thing I would like to add as well, I really actually liked the depiction of the Terrans in this universe. For once, it was nice to see them not scheming and plotting to kill one another, which I think is a trope which doesn't really fit the order of the universe. This ship, much like the NX-01 and how that functioned when we saw that, typifies more likely how the Terran Navy would operate. Chakotay and Janeway are clearly not plotting to kill one another. It may happen at some point, but clearly at the moment it is not. The crew seem pretty organized, put together, and collectively operating as an efficient fighting vessel. They were also willing to cooperate with the Federation people that they encountered, again indicating there is reason within Terrans. They're not irrational, mindless killing machines like they're sometimes portrayed to be. They'd have to be more complex. And I really liked, actually, we saw this version. Yes, Janeway only helped them out of a sense of self-preservation, but that's still better than, again, like psychotically just killing them for the sake of it, because how dare you come aboard my ship and board my vessel and take over the bridge and mess with my deflector dish. I'm going to kill you now, and then I'll deal with these aliens. Rather than doing that, she actually worked with them, and that, to me, was a better, more realistic interpretation of how the Terrans would, on a day-to-day basis, operate. Things like mutinies and turning against the captain to advance your promotion would be a relatively rare thing, as we often see within the universe. They still have to justify such actions, and I did like to see this version. It's not clear if there are any non-Terrans aboard the ship, as the entire crew seemed to be wearing head-to-toe armor. It was hard to tell if they were Terran or if there were other non-Terrans serving aboard this vessel. I would say history in the Mirror Universe would indicate that there were non-Terrans aboard the ship, but that's hard to say. Ultimately, I really liked this particular version, and I really hope that we see more of it. Other versions of the Mirror Universe we have seen in more recent years, as there's been more and more encounters, such as a Terran scientist actually becoming a member of the Starfleet after crossing over aboard the ISS Enterprise in the 23rd century. We've got Lorca, although obviously a pretty evil and dastardly individual, cultivated a powerful cult of personality around himself and demonstrated extreme loyalty to his subordinates and genuine affection for multiple individuals. We also had Empress Georgiou, although again an incredibly ruthless and objectively evil person, showed a lot of growth and potential and capability as a person beyond just being, again, a Terran savage. But going back to my original question, and let me know in the comment section below, what do you think about this particular incarnation of the Mirror Universe? Is it the one we always encounter when Kirk goes there, Sisko goes there? Is this the Dark Universe we see in the novels? Is it the Star Trek Online version? Clearly not the Kelvin version, but which is it? All of which, incidentally, a lot of those, including the Kelvin timeline, or the Narada timeline, I think it actually basically referred to it, are actually referenced in these episodes. So if you've not actually checked out Star Trek Prodigy Season 2 or Season 1, I'll admit it's not my favorite Star Trek. It isn't. It's taken me a lot of time to build up to actually watch it. I find it a little childish. But that's a bigger conversation about my personal opinions on a Star Trek show. I do really enjoy it, but it did take me a while to get to the point where I was enjoying it. And I did find Season 2 to be substantially better than Season 1, but let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And if you made it all to the end of the video, I hope you enjoyed it, and bye-bye.